This is ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel on what has been a traumatic night for English sport. Delighted to be joined by Danny and Elliot. We have just seen Josh Warrington lose his IBF world title against Luis Alberto Lopez in Leeds. Very close scorecards. Danny, Elliot, thank you for joining me. How are both of you? I know, Elliot, I know you're English through and through. Danny, not so much. So we got some mixed emotions on the chat tonight.
I'm devastated, mate. I mean, as we can say, it's not coming home unless you live potentially in Argentina, Croatia, Morocco, or now France. But it is what it is. More devastated than that actually than I am about what happened in Leeds. But it is what it is. But yeah, I don't want to take the shine off Danny, who's been very happy. I think Jean-Luc Daniel is part French. I think he's very happy with proceedings this evening. So I wouldn't take the gloss off of that.
Yeah, good night for you, Danny.
No, I don't know what you boys.
Bonjour, Daniel.
I seen Elliott's face there. I was getting ready to start sticking it in, just saying I was devastated. Thought, you know what? I know it's still a bit raw for you boys, so we'll just stick to boxing tonight.
Yeah,
that's very generous of you.
Yeah, looking forward to the Euros, but yeah, not sure Ireland will be there. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, sorry, Danny, I couldn't resist. Back to Josh Warrington. Britain is down a world champion tonight. Danny, going to go to you first. Just general thoughts on the fight. Went the distance, scores of 115, 113 twice, and Howard Foster gave it a draw. I enjoyed the fight. It was nice for there to be a decent UK main event for a change. To be honest, we've not had too many of those this year. But yeah, wrap it up for me. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it wasn't the most entertaining fight I've ever seen. Certainly didn't have the drama of the Lara fight for Warrington, obviously. But I sort of agree with what you said. It was sort of compelling because I've never seen a fighter who fights the way Lopez fights. Because you look at him and you think he's almost a bit of a Lara regen. Sort of he doesn't have the same power as Lara, but he looks so raw and green almost. But his reflexes were so good. Warrington, I know he came on strong late, but certainly in the early half of the fight was really struggling to catch him clean. As the sort of commentators pointed out, he would just get out of the way last second, even if it's sort of not the way you normally see boxers slip, quite unconventional, but was very effective. I thought the judges' scorecards were good. To be fair, I think when Warrington did have that late rally, sort of even though Lopez had banked so many of the early rounds, there was a sort of collective. I know in our chat then I was right, are we going to see another sort of doing here? But thought all three were certainly passable scorecards. I had it maybe 115, 113, or maybe a round wider than that. The draw I can see any closer to Warrington than that. I can't see. I don't see any way you can give him 7 of the 12 rounds. So I'm disappointed for Warrington. I suppose there's still big fights there, but you imagine the gloss certainly gone from a lot of them. But no, a good night, big night sort of in terms of significance for this boxing, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. We will see what happens next. Elliot, just interested to get your thoughts as well. What did you expect to happen tonight against what actually did happen?
You and I spoke, didn't you, on the review show, and you were saying you'd seen a bit of Lopez, and you were sort of almost pre-warning that this would happen. You've seen him at your call, is that right? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I to be honest with you, I expected a Warrington decision win here. I almost sitting there thinking, don't get me wrong, I like Josh Warrington actually. I'm a fan of Josh Warrington. And it's almost one of those ones where you think he's fighting in Leeds. Lopez is almost going to have to sort of nearly kill him to essentially get any sort of joy here. So frankly, I just thought if Warrington gets the bell, gets a kind of actually quite a close fight as it kind of turned out in some ways, even though I think Lopez won it, I was fully preparing to listen to the Warrington UD victory, frankly. But it was nice to see Lopez almost get, like Danny was saying, being rewarded essentially for that first half of the fight as well. Warrington sort of came on in sort of bursts in the second half. But yeah, I was actually quite happy with to see him actually get the decision. I'm actually also quite surprised to see it happen, given the location. Yeah,
if I'm being honest, when the bell went for the final bell went when the 12th round was finished, I thought Lopez isn't getting a decision here. He can maybe get a draw at best. So it was, to be fair, quite refreshing to see Lopez get the well-earned decision and no kind of wacky kind of 118, 110 scorecards in Warrington's favour. There was none of that tonight.
I was fully expecting that.
Yeah,
100%. Three times. 118, 110, 116, 112.
Yeah.
And still, is what I was expecting to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Gonna move on to what is next for both fighters. Josh Warrington now 34 fights into his career, 32 years old, actually made his debut back in 2009. So he's been around quite a long time. Josh Warrington made his debut as at quite an early age. I know it's a close points loss to a featherweight who's actually quite good, who some people were picking to win this fight. So it's not kind of he's not lost to someone who's expected to beat easily. It's not a massive shock tonight, I would say. But Elliot, just want to go back to you. What do you think is left in the career of Josh Warrington? Do you think he maybe only has 1 or 2 fights left? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's been obviously documented, hasn't it, that Warrington's obviously been injured as well. He's come back from that. He was obviously talking about the jaw injury, but the shoulder injuries that he's had, the operations that he's had. And I don't think, I think it's harsh to say it in some ways, but I don't think it's unfair essentially to say that he's not the fighter he once was. And like you alluded to, he's had a long career. This stage, style-wise, don't obviously think he can reinvent himself. And that obviously the Selby, Frampton, Galahad sort of run, whilst obviously good, the sort of the peak for him in some ways, I think. I'm not sure he's necessarily got that anymore. But then you sort of look at the kind of rankings around, especially around sort of like British level as well. Obviously, you've got kind of like, you've got Lee Wood, you've got like Dickens kicking around there, Nick Ball even. I'll still put Warrington in the conversation as being, like, Warrington versus Lee Wood would still be a massive fight, frankly, I think. I'd probably back Lee Wood to win that, to be perfectly honest, but it's still a fight that I'd like to see. On the sort of world stage, I frankly don't know if those sort of titles or a sort of rebirth of Josh Warrington is there, frankly. I don't think it is. So it depends, I suppose, for me on does he want to sort of cash out with that massive fan base? It's sad. It actually makes me feel quite sad in the sense that he was talking mostly about obviously the big US states, and I almost feel like Warrington in the US would have been a hell of an experience for that fan base as well. So I actually feel a bit gutted that that's probably not going to happen, and maybe shouldn't happen. But I still think he's got, at least domestically, a kind of. I still put him probably behind Lee Wood in the British sort of rankings in that division.
Yeah, it kind of felt like a few years ago he had those big fights against Lee Selby at Ellen Road, and then he fought Carl Frampton in Manchester a few months later. Like, I mean, I don't know if he won British Fighter of the Year that year, but he probably should have done. He kind of doing that 2 fights in a row, and it just feels like since then, kind of obviously had the Mauricio Lara defeat, the Kid Galahad fight, which a lot of people thought he lost, and he's not the biggest kind of fight he's had in terms of kind of eyes on him was possibly the Mauricio Lara rematch, which obviously got called off after 2 rounds. So I think I can imagine, and with that plus injuries, I can imagine it's been a frustrating and disappointing couple of years for him. Danny, what do you think is next for Josh Warrington? What do you think is going to happen?
It's hard to say because, like, although I would agree with Elliot, like, he's definitely not the fighter of that great run a few years ago, but he's not like completely shot by any means. I think he just sort of like can't do what he done back then. The sort of like he was like a Duracell bunny, would never stop, and I think as a result you sort of see him like sort of caught between styles a lot. It's tricky because obviously Lee Wood's still a big fight, but like it's nowhere near as big as it would have been without, like, potentially being a unification.
Yeah,
I think it's like Lee Wood's going to fight Lara. So I suppose if, regardless of that result, that fight will be there. In the Lee Wood Lara fight, you've got like Michael Conlon obviously looking to get back to the top level again, got a great win tonight. But then you sort of look elsewhere in that division, and as you said, Elliot, so I think that big night in the States is probably gone. Don't think a Santa Cruz fight is likely. Ray Vargas, that's not going to happen. And I think Navarrete's moving up and vacating, so I don't know how he'd be ranked with the WBO or anything, but maybe there'd be a vacant title coming there. But it's hard to say. I think his best days are maybe like one last payday, the Lee Wood one. If he comes through Lara, I don't think anyone would turn their nose up at that fight. But I think you're definitely sort of getting into the last fight or 2 for Josh Warrington now, I would imagine.
You mentioned I'd actually love to see Warrington fight Conlon. Like, not 2 guys that aren't like massive punchers, but it'd be sort of really good to see. I'd actually be really happy.
It'd still be a massive fight that, like 2 really still like loyal fan base. They could easily do 10,000-15,000 tickets for that if it was sort of pushed right. So that's definitely an option as well.
That's a good point. I do. Obviously, Michael Conlan was in action as well tonight. Scored a first round KO over Karim Gurfi. I was watching the zone card, so I haven't caught the fight, but I do think that if Michael Conlan can't fight for a world title next, I think that's definitely a possibility. You've got to think. So I think, Danny, you mentioned kind of two loyal fan bases. I don't know where that fight would be. I mean, could it be in Ellen Road? I wouldn't rule that out. Maybe that's too big. I don't know. But
well,
I don't know.
When Warrington fought Frampton, it was in Manchester, and that sort of worked quite well for both fan bases to get to. And one of my mates was at it and said there was like quite an equal split, and obviously Conlan's Belfast as well. So that's obviously a potential venue for it.
Yeah, looks like we're kind of in agreement that would be a good fight. Because I feel like Warrington at the stage of his career, one thing I don't want to see him do, and I don't think he can do, is have an 8-rounder or fight someone we've not heard of. You can't do that at his age. The amount of fights he's had, he's not got enough time to do that, and I don't think there's no interest in that. That's just my opinion. Elliot, we're going to kind of wrap things up now. Elliot Grigg, who wins, Michael Conlan or Josh Warrington?
Oh, that's delightful question. I'm actually going to go with Conlan, frankly. The Conlan that fought Lee Wood looked very good, very switched on, and I think some of the stuff you see with Warrington, like, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Warrington, but some of the stuff he does, the punching to the back of the side of the head, the headbutting, all that sort of stuff, I'd prefer to see Conlan win from a sort of boxing purist type of perspective, and I just think, I would just lean towards that way, frankly. I don't think obviously Warrington's got the power to sort of equalise Conlan, frankly, like Lee Wood did. So I actually think Conlan would beat him.
Okay, 1-0 to Conlan. Danny, which way are you going for that one?
That's just to touch up first. It's a good point that Elliot makes. I think in his last couple of fights, Warrington has turned into a very dirty fighter. Like, the use of the head's ridiculous. But in terms of the question, I would probably favour Conlan as well. I think the Warrington of old would be far too much for him, that like relentless pressure. But I think this Warrington, tries to box a bit. I think whatever you think of Conlan, like, he's a proper pure boxer, and I think, again, might not necessarily be the most entertaining fight in the world, but I would edge Conlan. Just one more fight we didn't mention. The Mauricio Lara trilogy will always be there. Obviously, I don't think that would go particularly well for him, but I think that would be one of the bigger fights. And in terms of getting yourself back to like title contention, that would be the fight to do it.
Yeah, I think Mauricio Lara is a dangerous man, and I don't think, for one reason or another, I'd love to see the trilogy, but I don't think that will happen personally. One fight I wouldn't mind seeing is Lopez against Mauricio Lara, if I'm honest. Final question. Go back to you, Danny. Thoughts on that fight, and if there's any other fights you want to see Lopez in next? I mean, he's 29 years old. He has got a couple of losses on his record. That's 10 wins in a row for the Mexican now. People in the UK are going to be aware of him now. He's come over. He's stopped Isaac Lowe when he was undefeated. He's beaten Josh Warrington in Leeds. It's not easy to do. What do you want to see him do next?
I mean, you obviously want to see people go into like the unifications or the fights with the likes of Lara. In terms of that one, I don't even know what that fight would look like. That is two wild men in a boxing ring. In terms of what's likely, because obviously he signed with Top Rank, didn't they? And like based off what they've done with like Navarrete when he was champion at that weight, they'll probably just like not feed him cans, but I don't think you're likely to see a unification or anything like particularly soon, particularly with who all the other champions are signed to. So I think they'll probably try and build him over in the States for a while, and then potentially try and make a big sort of in-house fight. But in an ideal world, you want to see the unifications, and even like the Lara fight would be absolute fireworks.
Yeah, good stuff. Elliot Grigg, I'll wrap things up with you. Where do you want to see Luis Alberto Lopez go next? He is an exciting fighter. Can you see him possibly coming back to Britain? I think if certain things happen, I do think it's a possibility for a possibility for Lee Wood. I think Lee Wood wants the big exciting fights for next year. What do you think could be next for the Mexican?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, it's almost a shame to have to come to me, because Danny's obviously the boxing head out the two of us, and I think he actually summed it up quite well there. But yeah, I'd like to see, obviously, like to see the Lara fight. I also kind of agree with him. I don't necessarily think that will happen next. But then just looking at that kind of, that sort of IBF rankings as well, you've got other people sort of kicking around in there. I mean, obviously, it'd be great if he did fight Lee Wood. Could I see him coming back to England and fighting someone like Jazza Dickens? Probably. I can see that sort of thing happening. But equally, I think I can see him coming back, frankly. And I do think, I mean, a lot of these fighters do tend to talk about the British crowd, the British audience, and essentially being different than obviously other nations and in its kind of support. So yeah, I'd love to see him back, frankly. And I almost feel like, obviously, a lot of people will be somewhat upset, especially in the kind of Yorkshire area, at what happened this evening. But I think equally, Lopez would have earned a lot of fans. So I'd like to see him back, and I'd like to see him obviously in that sort of Lara fight, but I don't expect to see that happen next, unfortunately.
Good stuff. All right, gents. I'm sure we could talk for longer, but it's gone midnight, and I'm sure it's past some of our bedtime, so we'll leave things there. Danny and Elliot, thank you for joining me. It's been good to review the fight. Josh Warrington has lost his world titles to Luis Alberto Lopez, but hopefully there are still big nights for the Yorkshireman ahead. Thanks for joining me, gents.